Hello. So moving on, let's start working on the carbon fiber shader. But before we start on that, I'd like to say that I changed the settings on the scale for the wall. This is our test render. As you can see in our previous render, the pattern's really large. So to reduce the repetition of the pattern, you can change the scale inside the settings tab. Also, you could reduce the amount of displacement that's happening. You could reduce this to about 0.3. The displacement that we see here is at 0.05. Okay. It's more visible where the light interacts with the model. Okay, so now moving on to the carbon fiber. We'll take stripes. It's one of the pattern generators inside of Houdini. Let's quickly select one of the carbon fiber parts. So we could take carbon fiber large, for example. It's these parts here. And for test rendering purposes, going to reduce our min-ray samples, and in the objects tab, temporarily remove the environment from our renders. And we're doing this mostly just because we have lesser processing to do while render testing. Okay. So using the render region tool, see what we get. Okay, so the stripes are huge, as expected. Reduce the blur. If the strip width is too much for what we're looking for, you could reduce that. So let's say just take it down to 0.2. So now the black stripes are bigger and the white stripes are smaller. If you keep it halfway, the stripes are even. They take even space, and you could completely take out the blur. But if you do that, we lose the whole pattern. So you could reduce it to some really tiny value. Okay. So we'll take the stripes and we'll basically use a principal shader again. Principal shader is just awesome. So now that we have our principal shader and our stripes, we're just going to quickly add a fit range. Fit range is an awesome tool. There's so many different uses for fit range. It's amazing. I will rename this to pattern 01. Duplicate this principal shader, and let's call this pattern 4. Expand the surface drop-down within both principal shaders. And what we're going to do is we're going to pipe the stripes into the base color that we have here. In our fit range, let's see what we get. We should still get our original like stripes coming out of this pattern generator here. So that's the original, and the fit allows us to invert it basically. So what we're gonna do now is create a layer mix. Add the two patterns in A and B. We can pipe the stripes as our alpha, and our fit range will be our base color for pattern 4. Inside, you can turn off use point color. It's not that important, but yeah. Let's now add our textures. I've gone ahead and created these textures beforehand, and they'll be part of the DLC. But primarily, what I did was I got texture files, and you can go to CG textures or any texture website, really. Google a texture, bring it into Photoshop or your photo editing package, and create your maps there, export them out as TIFF files, then use the Houdini image viewer and save them as .rat files. So we'll just take the carbon 1 color and of course put it in the wrong texture path. Let's just change the name here. So this is carbon 1, and as you can see it says pattern 1. Try to keep your naming convention consistent. It just helps to recognize things when there's a lot going on within your scene. In this instance, there's not really a lot going on, but you get the idea. So we have our base color texture, our displacement texture within both principled shaders. Okay. We're not going to change the scale because the patterns are of similar scale, and I'd like to maintain that, but go ahead and experiment if you choose to do so. So with just this setup, let's see what we get. Something to consider when actually using displacement is this concept of displacement bounds. And we'll have to separately create a properties node, and we'll add some expression in there. So the expression will change as we change values. So right off the bat, this is not the look that I'm really going for. One thing that I'd like to change is the effect is pretty strong, and carbon fiber weave usually is very subtle. I mean, so we'll change the effect scale to something like 0.0, not 1, and 2. Also, I'd like the direction to be going up instead of going down. So the negative value means the offset would be within the geometry, and the positive value is the displacements will be higher than the original geometry, if that makes any sense. Let's quickly jump into our render view, do a quick preview render of the entire scene, and then we'll select a portion where we'll just edit that area just to see where we're at. Shift and left click and draw the box, the rectangle that'll allow you to render a certain region. So this is looking pretty decent. Obviously we can further tweak this however we choose to do so. But for the time being, let's say this looks great. Yeah, so we'll just collapse everything into a material. So all our surface exports, displacement exports, and our collect got with our properties have been all put together. And we'll create a parameter. Pipe this into frequency for the stripes. I will just call this arm label amount, and I'd like an integer value to come through this parameter. So if we jump up, we have all these parameters here, and the parameter interface, Make this invisible. So we just have the amount, and the amount is 0 right now because it's being driven by the parameter. So the defaults have been lost. You could set a default value here if you would like to do so. Let's say we're at 35. Color this gray like. So this properties tab is linked to the displacement bounds we have here. You could have a custom expression going into this, and let's say if you did want to do something like that and you just wanted to control the displacement bound by the enable texture displacement parameter, the offset, the scale, and for both. So just the 3 parameters. I put together something earlier, and it's kind of long. So what we'll do is just quickly talk about what's going on here. So we find out if the displace texture option is enabled for both patterns, pattern 1 and 2. We see what the displace texture scale is and the offset is, and we add the two, and we add that to if whether those displacements have been turned on, and this will function whether one's turned on or the other's turned on, and it'll function even if you have negative values coming in, because the final result we turn it into an absolute value, which will always be positive. Okay, so see if we just of course you have to change the string. I had named them CB pattern before, so that's why it's not working. But let's say if we change these here now, this should know what it's referencing. And there's our carbon fiber texture, or shader, sorry. And this can be used in any situation. Moving on, we'll talk about creating the tire texture. And from there, we'll head into creating all the other materials, setting them up, assigning them, and render everything. Okay, see you.